hours. And, man, do we have a lot of ground to cover tonight. Stories don't get much bigger than, a little something called the end of the world. Coming up in an hour or so, we'll talk to a couple of guys who have made an art form, or at least a business, out of predicting the future. They are self-described time monks who essentially mine the Internet. They speed read everything that appears in cyberspace and to get a feel for what's on the mind of the public. And then they use this information to predict what's going to happen. And from what they've seen lately, there's some really bad stuff coming. Isn't there always? Anyway, we'll be joined by some fascinating guys, George Ure and his time monk, Craig, to talk about a whole range of things that are barreling down the track like a runaway train headed right for us. If you'll recall, I was here last month, and it was an interesting call came in on the phone lines from one of our listeners who told me about something called halfpasthuman.com and their use of what he called web bots to sort of predict the future. And me being a technophobe that I am, I didn't exactly know what he was talking about, but did a little research on it. And then our producer, Lisa Lyon, did some digging into it and talked to the guys we're going to be talking with now. And along the line, I also saw a news story that ran on national wires, and it said this. It said that there are two think tanks, the Arlington Institute and the web bots of halfpasthuman.com, who are independently forecasting what they called impending event alerts. In the case of the Arlington Institute, it was supposed to be something that happened in the next 60 days. In the case of the web bots, they had this impending event alert that was from October through February, but with a warning period during the period of September 22nd to the 27th, which is coming up this week. And each of these think tanks, according to the article, follow sort of a different pattern to figure these things out, but both are saying something comparable to a 9/11 event is coming down the pike, and that's pretty scary. Our guests, and I'm really looking forward to this discussion because they have a wide range of interests. Our guests are George Ure, who has a varied background in business. He was vice president of an international airline. He was a news director in radio. And he started writing about this WebBot project back in 2001. And apparently it has been used with great success by a couple of really wealthy investors who use it to sort of figure out, in their words, where and when the sky is going to fall. And then the second guest is a guy who we're just using his first name, Clif, who has developed this technique for sort of reading computer screens and basically mining the Internet for information, and then putting it together to essentially be able to predict future events in near real time. And I guess that's been some remarkable accuracy on the part of their predictions. George and Cliff, thanks for joining us.
Our pleasure.
Yeah, glad to be here.
Cliff, let's start with this. Why can't I use your real last name?
You can if you want. I was outed by Jeff Rentz some time back. It's never an issue of anything other than trying to get personality out of the way. I'm not at all important. I'm merely a guy who stumbled on something. It's not like I claim ownership on the idea. I'm not trying for patents or anything. What's important is the information that comes out. The method is intriguing, but the personalities behind it are of really no value except for George Ure. He's kind of entertaining for all of us.
Well, is there any concern for both of you guys about having a normal life or being inundated with requests, or do you really take this seriously enough to where you're worried about what's going to happen to your own lives coming in the future?
George, you'd better answer that one.
No, I mean, this is really a garage-built time machine project, if you will. In real life, I consult for companies like eMachine Shop and they're affiliated companies. I do sales and marketing for a living, and this is sort of a second life that that I've got. Cliff is doing it full time because he's really the brains of the operation. I'm just the marketing front guy.
And Cliff? we do expect impacts. There's no question. This is not something that is not some kind of a scam where we're just pumping the stuff out and sitting back here laughing at everybody buying it up and this kind of things. We're actually trying to control the information so that it doesn't go out and cause essentially a karmic ripple that we're not prepared to live with.
Well, we're going to get into what the ripple is in a minute, but before we leave this part of it, I'm just wondering, I saw the biographical info that came along with this for George, and it says that you now live on a small ranch in a remote part of Texas, and I'm just wondering, are you guys so concerned by the predictions that we're going to talk about now that you're hunkering down?
Oh, I hunkered down a long time ago. I actually left Los Angeles was 2005 because in the linguistics we had a large earthquake that was set to occur in along about latitude 34 or so in the Southwest. Turned out to be Southwest Asia, not U.S., but it was the big Pakistani earthquake. So, yeah, I take this stuff serious as a heart attack. I'm out of a big city because I don't want to be there, and you got to ask Clif, why is he building a boat?
Is that really an ark?
No, not that so much, but something that you might say would sustain itself in extreme conditions, yes.
Well, tell me, let's start this way. How did you develop this thing, and how does it work?
It works. I'll give you the pat answer here, and we can get into as much detail as you figure your audience needs.
Okay.
It becomes quite complex as you drill down into it, and everybody's eyes glaze over when you get into the programming issues. So somebody there pull the plug on me if I get too deep in it. But
I'm your guy. I'm your guy.
Basically, here's the idea. All humans are psychic. Most humans don't know they're psychic. All humans, whether they know it or not about being psychic, leak out this psychic pre-information in their speech pattern. We have a software program that is like any other kind of search engine. It just goes out and reads things. Only ours reads things for an emotional content based on certain words rather than any kind of indexing scheme. We don't read emails. We don't read anything other than publicly available information. And we're not looking for what's printed. We're looking for the changes. We're looking for subtle changes in how language is used in ordinary kind of conversations. And then we assign values to that. And in those values is some meaning that we interpret. Sort of makes sense?
Yeah. So are you saying that, for example, you look for frequency of certain words coming up and how they change?
No, we don't do word
Not
counting.
frequency.
It's
okay.
not quite that simplistic. Rather what we do is we look for archetypes. Why are people using I can back up and I can say that most Americans may have a vocabulary of 80,000 to 100,000 English language words. In any given week, they really only use perhaps 11,000, depending on the complexity of their particular level of work, up to maybe 20,000. In their private life, they really might only use 5,000 or 6,000 with repetition. And the idea is that within that range, why do they choose one word group over another to express a similar idea? Again, sort of makes sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Is it your belief that there's a collective consciousness? You said all humans are psychic, that we all have these powers to one degree or another, but
it's
collectively.
It's my certain knowledge. I've had some enlightenment experiences as a result of long years of meditation that lead me to the full understanding that is absolutely the case.
And then, but that collectively we're even better than individually.
Much more so.
And how far out are we seeing stuff? How far out do you believe that we can see stuff, whether we know we're seeing it or not?
Some individuals, of course, it's like with any other thing with humans. Humans are what we call fifth-order beings. They exhibit diversity that is just scattered all over the place. You know, giant big humans, little small humans, very smart humans, very fast humans, etc. So there's bound to be extreme cases of psychic ability. Makes sense, right?
Yeah. So do you guys, the material that was sent to me says you have some wealthy investor kind of guys who pay attention to you, and they invest their money based on the kinds of things that you predict. Do you do this yourself? I mean,
No, I don't really have that much understanding of that kind of an understanding of money. Whenever I do that kind of thing, I fail miserably, as George will tell you from recent experience.
George, can you give me some examples of where this thing has been right on the money or pretty close to it?
Oh, sure. When Clif and I started corresponding, I
work backwards.
Work back. Oh, you mean from the most recent?
Yeah.
Oh,
hey,
okay.
I'll tell you what. We need to take a break, and so you get your thoughts together on working backwards, and we'll come right back, and you can tell us how this thing works. Stay with us on Coast to Coast AM. Welcome back to Coast to Coast. We're talking with George Ure and Clif, two self-described time monks, and I love that term. And I'll tell you, we haven't even heard their success stories yet for how this thing works, but they've got me hooked big time. George, right before the break, you were going to sort of give me a laundry list of the kinds of things where this worked, working backwards. Am I to guess that maybe you guys saw this financial collapse coming?
Oh, sure. That's really been in the data set for, since 2001, 2002.
Yeah, 2002 for sure.
Yeah. And one of the problems with something when we see it way, way ahead of time is we have this working theory that says the further in advance we can see it, the bigger the event's going to be in terms of impact. So something as small as a couple of American athletes falling off a motorcycle but making big headlines at the Olympic Games, we'll see maybe, Clif, 3 days a week?
3 days, maybe 4, yeah.
Yeah, before the event. Or something really big like 2004, the Banda Aceh earthquake, 6-8 months before the event. And similarly, like in May of this year, we put up a public warning the Friday before the China earthquake, and then the day before, I guess 36 hours before the China quake, I put up on my site, which is urbansurvival.com, public warning called Wedding Quake. And it's curious because the wedding quake itself came in two aspects. In other words, there was the Jenna Bush wedding, which happened right in front of the earthquake. And then the second aspect of the wedding quake came out 2 weeks later when we saw all those AP pictures out of China of those couples standing in front of the broken down church that was destroyed in the quake.
Yeah, let me interject here. That's a perfect example of archetypes. Weddings are an archetype that runs deep in all cultures, across all cultures and languages. And we picked up wedding repeatedly, and that was the sort of thing that triggered an action alert, if you will, from us.
So there can be a lot of times when you're getting the clues, you've got the language, but you really don't know what the heck it means until it happens.
Certainly, all the time. We're facing one now.
Well, we'll come to that in a second. Were you up and running prior to 9/11? Were you able to see that one coming?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. George can describe that.
Here's what I'd like to hear. How do you, when you talked about being able to predict this financial crunch back in 2001, 2002, how did you write that? And in what form is it written that says you were onto it and knew about it?
We produced absolutely volumes and reams of information, I think like maybe 3,600 pages so far. Basically what I do is this. I'll extract the language that provides me the clues in the interpretation process and put brackets around it, individual words or phrases. And then I'll string together sentences that provide a background context to those individual words or phrases such that it sort of is a descriptive paragraph. So it's kind of like a novel in that you run out of the dialogue and you run into a description where they're providing you with information and setting the background. I have to do that for some of the words that I extract that say this word is unique and it's archetypical. And many times I'll have to stop and explain why we think that. So it's not like we just said, on this date this is going to occur.
Gotcha. So are you also leaving it up to your clients to figure out what the heck it means to some degree?
Frequently, because a lot of times we'll get archetypes that describe things down pretty perfectly. Like we had an incident where I think it was George Ure that goaded me into it, and I went looking for terrorism specifically. We can run in two modes. We can run our software such that whatever bubbles up to the surface we look at, or we can hunt for specific kinds of contexts. And the context is a big grouping of words around a central concept. And so I think George had goaded me into it, so I went out looking for terrorism. And lo and behold, we found it after, I think, 3 or 4 days of running through the data. And we predicted that there would be a terrorist-associated power outage 3 weeks in the future, and that it would have the following kind of characteristics. And we described how it would go step by step in the sense that it would flow from an area that had a south-facing exposure, railroad tracks, cranes, where rivers intersect, and so on. We didn't have a specific location. This is one of our problems. People use specific locations so frequently on the Internet, we can't trust them. Because we get so many millions of those, we have to throw them away. So we don't want to be deluded by, for instance, a sudden increase in frequency in the word Niagara, and assume it could be at Niagara Falls.